My name is Jimmy Creech. For 29 years, I was a minister in the United Methodist Church, and for about half of that time, I believed that homosexuality was a sin because the church taught that, and because I had learned that as a child and had carried that idea up through childhood into young adulthood. But in 1984, a member of the congregation I was serving came out to me as a gay man. I was shocked. I was surprised that he was gay. I'd known him for 3 years. He was active in the church and in the community. He was a wonderful friend, someone I loved dearly, a person of integrity and dignity. He did not fit the stereotype that I had about what a gay person is like. And so his integrity and dignity challenged me to study and try to find out why the church teaches that homosexuality is a sin and why society in general holds that opinion. I studied the Bible. I studied human sexuality, and I studied church history. And what I discovered is that the church's traditional teaching about homosexuality being a sin is not based on the teachings of Jesus, and it's not based on the Bible. It's based on Greek philosophies that shaped the teachings of the church in its first 200 or 300 years. When the church moved out of the Jewish context into the Greek world, it encountered several philosophies, Stoicism, Manichaeism, Gnosticism, that taught that reality is divided into two parts, the physical and the spiritual. The spiritual is good. The spiritual is how we relate to God. But the physical, these philosophies taught, was corrupt and evil. And to be in relationship to God, one of the things the philosophies taught was to deprive yourself of the physical pleasures and comforts in order to be more spiritual. Things associated with the physical, therefore, were considered also evil. And sexuality, sexual intimacy, was one of those human activities that these Greek philosophies defined as sinful and evil. And these philosophies shaped the teachings of the early church. Augustine was one of the teachers in the early church who emphasized that human sexuality, human sexual intimacy, was sinful. The only acceptable reason that one could have an intimate sexual relationship with another person was for procreation, and it had to be in the context of marriage. But Augustine also taught that you couldn't enjoy it, that if you did enjoy sexual intimacy, that was also a sin. So the church began in its first hundreds of years of existence to teach, based on Greek philosophies, that sexual intimacy in itself, because it was a physical activity, was sinful, that it was in conflict with the spiritual. And one of the consequences of this is that sexual intimacy as an expression of love was forgotten, and sexual intimacy was basically then redefined as lust. In the 13th century, another great church teacher, Thomas Aquinas, taught that the only purpose for human sexuality was procreation, using not the teachings of Jesus or the Bible, but a Greek philosophy who lived some 300 years before Jesus, Aristotle. And his teachings became the official teachings of the Roman Catholic Church in the 13th century. And from that point on, any sexual intimacy that did not have the potential for procreation was categorically defined as sinful. And this had to do with a sexual intimacy between a man and a woman, as well as sexual intimacy between two people of the same gender. The interesting thing, and the thing that's important to note, is this is all contrary to the teachings of the Bible. In the Bible, reality is a whole. There is no division between the physical and spiritual. The physical world is God's creation, and God considers it good and blessed. It's a gift to us from God. Our bodies are gifts from God. The world, the physical world, is an expression of God's goodness and His care for the creation, for all of us. The psalmists celebrate how that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Human sexuality is for the purpose of expressing love as well as for having children. It is something that is not looked upon as sinful and evil. Of course, it can be abused. People can be violent. People can be unfaithful. But the sexual intimacy between loving people is something that is celebrated and embraced and affirmed in the Bible. And so the teachings of the early church actually were in conflict with the Jewish context and the teachings of the Bible, which saw the human being as a physical and spiritual reality that God had created in God's own image, and God had declared to be good. It's important for us to get back to that early teaching of the Bible and understand that the early teachings of the church were affected in a very negative way from philosophies that were not Christian at all. God has created each of us as a physical and spiritual person. The physical is not in conflict with the spiritual. We are one entity. We are both spiritual and physical. And God has declared that we are good. And whatever our sexual orientation is, it is a normal, natural, and healthy aspect of what God has created as a part of who we are. So we should affirm and celebrate that, and not allow the negative teachings about sexuality to make us feel unworthy and make us feel ashamed.